2 years on from Russia's invasion of Ukraine, hundreds of thousands of soldiers and civilians have been killed as the country has tried to fend off Kremlin forces. Russia now controls roughly a quarter of Ukraine, and in recent weeks their forces have started to advance as Ukraine waits on Western aid. Is there an end in sight? What could it look like? To discuss, I'm joined by Carol Savietz, a senior advisor for MIT Security Studies Program and a research associate at Harvard's Davis Center for Russian and Eurasian Studies and the Harvard Ukrainian Research Institute. Carol, thanks so much for joining us today.
Sure. Pleasure.
So give us a sort of a status update. What is the situation in the Ukraine war right now?
It's a mess, to put it simply. Everybody over the summer and into the fall was talking about it turning into a stalemate, a war of attrition. That's why General Zaluzhny was fired, because he said publicly that it was a stalemate and everything. And now it looks as if Russia is again on the advance, moving in from the areas that they've already occupied, in part because Ukraine is running out of ammunition and artillery shells and the other things that they would need, because everything is tied up in the U.S. Congress at the moment. So whether it means that Russia can sustain the advance long term, we don't really know. We do know, for example, that they've retaken Avdiivka, which was that town that was heavily contested. And everybody said, oh, my God, this is, Ukraine is losing or is pulling back, what have you. A pro-Russian military blogger who was talking about the number of casualties, military casualties as a result of Russia having retaken Avdiivka, was found dead, supposedly committed suicide. Now, again, nobody knows what really happened, but the presumption, again, among people like me, is that he was taken out because he was admitting the truth about how costly these battles have been for Russia. So
if they've been so costly for Russia and, also horrendously costly for Ukraine,
right?
So Senator Schumer has urged that the United States sort of approve aid to Ukraine sort of soon. And we have audio of that.
We must show Putin that he must pay a price for the death of Navalny. And the best price the U.S. can make Putin pay is to give Ukraine the help they need to fend off Putin's evil aggressions.
If the United States doesn't deliver that help, do the Ukrainians have any chance?
I don't really know how to judge that, because the Europeans are apparently trying to pick up some of the slack, but I doubt that they could pick up all of the slack that would be created by the United States no longer providing any assistance. There's also some talk about taking at least the interest from the Russian funds that are being held in the West and giving it to Ukraine with which to buy ammunition, etc. I think it's a huge problem, and one of the things I think in terms of U.S. policy that we should be preparing for is some kind of sort of table setting, but equal table setting, so that the Russians and the Ukrainians could talk to each other to end the war. But we can't do it now with Russia on the advance. And Russia also, in my view, seems to be taking advantage of the dysfunction in the U.S. Congress at the moment to be sending drones and missiles and trying out newer weaponry against Kiev and Kharkiv and Dnipro and some of these other cities. I mean, they're getting hit more heavily than since the beginning of the war. So it's almost as if there's this lull in our attention, maybe, and therefore the Russians are taking advantage of it.
And so Senator Schumer has also mentioned the death of Alexei Navalny, which is sort of the event not on the battlefield that is shaping what's happening right now. How significant do you think his death is likely to be in the months going forward?
I have to say that I texted with a Russian friend who is a friend of Navalny, saying that I'm not surprised, but I'm shocked all at the same time. I'm shocked that they sort of had the chutzpah, to do this. One of my students today asked me why now, and again, I think it's because it seems like the U.S. is not able to pay attention to it at the moment. Navalny was a threat to Putin just by his mere existence. The elections are coming up in March. It's a foregone conclusion, but I think Putin would like to win by as many votes as possible to prove how popular he is. I think that Navalny was the one who was trying to say, this is Putin's corruption. You know, he did all those videos years back of Putin's dacha in Sochi, outside of Sochi, and other things to show the corruption of the elites. And therefore, he presents a major threat. 2 other major activists are also in jail, and I honestly hope that they don't meet the same fate that Alexei Navalny has. They have already threatened Yulia Navalnaya, his wife, who's in the United States at the moment, just don't come back because the same fate will greet you. It's kind of interesting that even though he was in jail and in you know, this horrible place and worked at the Arctic Circle and everything, that even then Putin still perceived him as a threat. So there's a debate now among people like me. Does that mean that Putin is feeling invincible because he took him out now? Or is it because Putin is really afraid and Navalny represented some kind of force that Putin couldn't control?
So given the scale of the casualties that both sides have suffered, and, you know, in particular for Ukraine, this is not a war of choice, but for Russia it is, the Russians have been able to sort of reconstitute their forces after the gargantuan initial losses they suffered. Do we think they continue to have the capacity to do that? Can they keep fighting this out for another 2 or 3 years if they choose to do that, or are they somewhere at their limit?
There's some speculation that there could be another general mobilization, but not until after the election. What surprises me is that there hasn't been even more protest of mothers, daughters, wives, etc., of the soldiers who are on the front line, because there are reports of mobile crematoria. There are reports that dead soldiers are being buried in the field and their bodies are not being given back to the families. I think they could probably sustain it for a while. They have a larger population, obviously, than the Ukrainians. But at some point, there are beginning to be demonstrations like there was during the Afghan War of the Organization of Soldiers' Mothers. It's not at that extent yet, but I think that that could be coming. So maybe Putin would like to sort of push really hard now and then maybe say, okay, it's enough.
But that's actually kind of striking, right? Because the casualties they've suffered in this war are vastly larger than, at least in terms of intensity, than they did in Afghan. And yet you're not seeing the same scale of protest.
I think because people are frightened, because even if you went to lay a flower in memory of Navalny the other day, you got arrested, your information was taken by the local police in whatever city. I think people are really afraid at the moment. It's almost Stalinist. I used the word in class today. It's almost Stalinist in a certain way. You know, you don't want to speak up. You don't want to be singled out. I guess the other question that I would have that goes to your question is, yes, sanctions haven't been terribly efficient until now, but the Russians are using sort of cloned iPhones and things like that. At some point, can they continue to do that and keep the population so complacent as it is now?
So 2 years into the war, it seems like there's not a lot of prospect for a short-term, ending in the near term.
No.
No. And on that note, Carol Savietz, sounds like we'll be having this conversation again
anytime,
several times. But thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you.